I consider Nier Automata to be one of my favorite games of all time, primarily, without spoiling anything, because of how the game concludes its story in a way that only games are capable of doing. So naturally, I was interested in playing what I've heard referred to as its first draft, Nier Replicant. I picked it up recently and immediately noticed similarities in how Yoko Taro likes to blend gameplay elements of hack and slash, bullet hell, 2D platformer, rail shooter, and books to tell a melancholic, existential story about the human condition. But there was no way I could prepare for one specific moment that happens in this game. Several hours in, I had come across the manor in the Southern Plains and was really surprised to step inside and realize that it's a Resident Evil reference. The lobby area is very reminiscent of the Resident Evil 1 lobby, and as you navigate the space, you do so through pre-composed camera angles. Now, I'm going to show you the 7-second moment of time that we're going to spend the rest of this video examining. When I first walked down this hallway, I was shocked. There's an intense clumsiness to how the 3 camera angles shift between each other, especially since you end up traveling a fairly short distance. I'm not sure if the video does the game feel justice, but navigating this hallway through these angles feels incredibly off-putting. Needless to say, I am fascinated by this moment. To fully dissect the decision making here, I'm going to need to make a couple assumptions. 1. The original run of Nier Replicant and Nier Gestalt by association would almost definitely have QA testers on this game that would bring up moments like this that feel hostile to the user experience. And 2, based on the previous assumption, we can now assume that this was left in the game intentionally. It was a decision, especially if it was left intact for the 2021 release of the game. So, to explain why Yoko Taro would create gameplay mechanics that are intentionally user-unfriendly, or un-user-friendly, we'll have to hit the literary theory books. Deconstruction is a term coined by the 20th century French philosopher, pardon my French, Jaques Derrida. Hope I got that right. Deconstruction, within a literary context, questions the relationship between a text and its meaning, if there is one at all. It's difficult to define, as Derrida himself once said that the definition critiques the very language needed to explain it. It argues that text cannot have a fixed meaning due to the many different ways that a text can be interpreted. As a simple example, let's take a look at the phrase, "I love you." It's commonly understood to be a term of endearment, right? However, if a stranger walks up to you with a 1,000-yard stare and says, "I love you," you're far more likely to sprint home than you are to return the words back. If a book tells you that a character smiled at another character, but failed to explain that their eyebrows were doing the evil villain pointing in thingy, then there are 2 very different ways that those words can be interpreted. Deconstructionist art leans into the confusion that takes place between itself and its audience's interpretation of it. Whether it's film, music, painting, or game design, the aim of deconstruction is to be disorienting. It takes a sledgehammer to the conventions and best practices of the medium and leaves the audience to look at the broken glass and attempt to derive meaning. Before I continue, let me say, I don't have a philosophy degree or an art history degree or anything. I like to skim Wikipedia sometimes. You can go ahead and take everything I'm saying with a heaping grain of salt. So, instead, I think we can look at deconstructionism through the lens of a deconstructionist artist that I'm much more familiar with, and draw parallels to Nier Replicant from there.
I'm gonna tell you who I know. I know Lil B. I know the bass guy. I'm gonna tell you a couple more people that I know that's not very important. If they ain't Lil B.
Lil B is a Bay Area rapper that gained notoriety in the late aughts/early 2010s on MySpace for putting out a prolific volume of work. Many of Lil B's mixtapes contain at least 100 songs, with his mixtape-based freestyle peaking at 848 songs. At first listen, within the context of what's considered good in modern hip-hop or even just music standards, Lil B doesn't sound quote-unquote good. He usually raps out of pocket, as if he recorded on beat, and then shifts the recording slightly to the right. He puts his ad-libs at the forefront of the production, oftentimes interrupting himself to yell swag or bass god. A good 80% of his thousands and thousands of songs are solely about how many women want to sleep with him, to use much less vulgar terminology than he would. Similar to the I love you example that we used earlier, if Lil B has been releasing over 300 songs a year solely about how many women he's been with, can we really take those words at face value? Or can we derive different meaning from them? It's very easy to interpret Lil B's work as a critique on modern hip-hop trends. Inadvertently, the very conventions that you could easily argue Lil B was intending to critique have become popularized as a result of his work. Lil B is probably your favorite rapper's favorite rapper. This also isn't to say that the entirety of Lil B's catalog isn't serious, or that every moment of Nier is a deconstruction on the action-adventure genre. When Lil B wants to be sincere, he writes songs about how much he loves his mom, or envisions a world where borders don't exist. When Yoko Taro wants to be sincere, he encourages you to do something selfless for another real-life person, even if you'd potentially hate the person on the other end. Now, Lil B, or Brandon McCartney rather, has never came out and said, "Hey everyone, Lil B is performance art," because A, it would unravel his entire career, and B, according to Jaques Derrida himself, the goal of deconstructionist art is not to heavily imply a critique or parody the medium or genre it exists in. It exists to publicly break the rules, for the sole purpose of breaking the rules. Similar to when you spend 20 minutes digging down a one-way labyrinthian tunnel only for the main character to say this.
You ever wish you could just warp back to the client after you get their stuff?
Whoa.
Or when you have no idea how to make it to the other side of this wall, only to discover the most meaningless hallway connects you to the other side, when a visible doorway would have accomplished the same exact thing with less friction. You could argue that within the same framework, Kanye's character design exists as a critique of how often women characters are put into skimpy outfits for the sole purpose of being eye candy, but frankly I just kind of think it's embarrassing here. Something that both Nier Automata and Nier Replicant also do is use the Route B playthroughs to recontextualize the events that take place in Route A with new information, further exploring the relationship between text and the meaning you can derive from it. It's like the smiling person example from earlier, except Route A is a sad face, and with new information, it somehow becomes even sadder. So I don't think it's a stretch to assume that Yoko Taro used a deconstructionist approach in these aspects of Nier Replicant, especially given the French philosophy flexing he did in Nier Automata, blatantly name-dropping, pardon my French again, Blaise Pascal, Simone de Beauvoir, and Jean-Paul Sartre, not to mention German philosophers Friedrich Engels, Karl Marx, and Friedrich Nietzsche. Let me hit you with a disclaimer one more time. I'm not a philosophy major. I really don't spend a lot of time thinking at all. For some reason, I'm just fascinated when very unique people put out very strange art into this world. I would say the world could use more Yoko Taros or Lil B's, but I'm not sure if their unique way of creating art is easy to replicate.